Professor Amartya Sen is here. I just said that I'm about to do what is impossible, which is to introduce Amartya Sen. So bear with me while I do it. And I've written, which I wouldn't normally write, but the stakes, as you might admit, are pretty high. So I want to say, for me and for my cohort of graduate students at Harvard, I was here in the 90s, there were others in the 80s, and we came from almost every country in the world and from almost every discipline within the university. Among my close friends, Amartya Sen was our model. He was kind of a living classical philosopher. He was sort of not just a Platonic ideal, he was Plato, sort of, for us. We were obsessed. I have to say, we were obsessed with his classes, we were obsessed with his writing. So first of all, starting with economics. Even for people like me who were not economists or training for it, we were all engaged by the deep debates that had been stirred up by the field. And Sen, he was just impossibly deep and impossibly broad in everything. Social choice theory, he had remade it. Economic theory, he'd basically remade that too. Whatever we touched upon in our conversations, Sen had written on. Welfare economics, decision theory. We thought we were so cutting edge decision theory, and then of course there was Sen. Development economics. I remember once we were having a discussion and we were doing gender and economics, and we thought we were so cutting edge in our graduate student days. And then of course someone realized Sen had worked on it, and that wasn't bad enough. He was actually still active in the field, so the rest of us might even give it up. And okay, that's just economics. For those of us who are studying philosophy, every giant we came across on either side of the pond, Rawls, Isaiah Berlin, Bernard Williams, Ronald Dworkin, Derek Parfit, Thomas Scanlon, Robert Nozick, Sen had not only something deeply interesting to say about each of their ideas, he had also worked with all of them. Economics, philosophy, history, literature. There was really no field without Amartya Sen, and I felt it personally. I had done Greek and Latin. I was here doing a PhD in Sanskrit in classical Indian aesthetic theory. This is generally a free pass in conversations. There are not many people who are even interested, much less know more about it. But it was not a free pass with Amartya Sen. I was a relatively new graduate student. I happened to be somewhere where he was. And I was talking to him, he asked me about my work, and I mentioned the great Indian literary theorist Abhinavagupta. It's usually a conversation stopper, not with Amartya Sen. He, of course, knew Abhinavagupta and his work better than I did. To just kind of save myself, because I held him in such high esteem, I turned to my usual winning cocktail line, which was, there's a strong strain of atheism in classical India, which goes completely unremarked on. It generally startles people, it stops conversations, but not with Sen. He nodded, he took up the argument, and then in the middle of it, he made a footnote reference to Madhvacharya's Sarvadarshana Sangraha, a great work which, of course, I had not read yet, but he had. Of course, later on, I found out that Sen had learned Sanskrit before he'd learned English. At Harvard, he recently told me he had collaborated with one of the greatest modern Sanskritists, Daniel H. Ingalls. Basically, as a friend of mine said to me then, Amartya Sen knew more Sanskrit at the age of 10 than I was going to learn in graduate school. So it was all very humbling, but I want to say it was humbling for me and for all of us in the deepest and best possible way. Sen's constant presence in our minds, it made us better. It enriched our thinking immeasurably. It forced us to make connections between fields and within a field. And most of all, it widened our view of the world and deepened our feeling for our fellow man. Because what I want to say is, behind everything that Amartya Sen has done, from the most technical work in economics onward, it has all been in the service of understanding human beings and the human condition and making that condition better. And I'm always getting weepy to think I'm here introducing this man who had made me better. So here we are. I could list his many awards. Of course, there's the Nobel, his many titles, starting with Thomas W. Lamont University Professor and Professor of Economics and Philosophy at Harvard. I could list his many books, from Economic Inequality to The Argumentative Indian. But I think most of you know this work, so let me just end by talking about the soil from which Amartya Sen grew. When the great Urdu poet and critic Hathi was writing about Urdu language and literature 100 years ago, the ground in India was still pretty thick with Urdu poets. Hathi said what he wanted to do was not bring attention to those poets. He wanted to bring attention to the garden that produced these poets, bulbuls, nightingales, as he called them. Amartya Sen was born in the garden that you might call the Bengal Renaissance. It was a large community and its leaders who met the modern world with extraordinary creativity and joy. You know some of the names, many of the names, poets like Tagore, Nazrul Islam, scientists like Jagdish Chandra Bose, spiritual leaders like Sharda Devi and Swami Vivekanand, filmmakers like Satyajit Ray. All these people, they changed the world forever and for the better, and they changed us and the way we think about the world. Amartya Sen is heir, and he is standard bearer to that great intellectual and cultural energy. May he continue to flourish and enrich us, as he said in his own Nobel talk, which, by the way, only mentions the work of hundreds of other scholars. He quoted Robert Goheen, who said, "I feel that if you have both feet planted on level ground, then the university has failed you. Right on. But then who wants to be planted on the ground? There are places to go." Professor Sen, I'm very grateful that this is one of the places you have come to. I'm deeply humbled by you accepting my invitation to speak today. Welcome.
No, I'm immensely, well, I don't know what to say, embarrassed with the kind words of Hitesh. I must say also, it's wonderful that Hitesh is back here and taking charge of things here. And I welcome him, and I welcome others who have been friends here. Where is India going is a somewhat is a somewhat combative title. Is there a problem there?
Closer to you.
It's hurting me. Would there be a way for me to know that I've been found? No?
I think it's enough.
It has found me.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm actually with great envy looking at someone at the very end of the hall who seems to be having a cup of tea. Is that tea? And I would love a cup of tea, if I may. Now, where is India going is a very it's a question that can be seen from many different perspectives. From the beginning of Indian history, India has tried to go in many different directions. And I think it may be an occasion to recollect some of them. But I ought to, since this is not a detective story, I can also give my main theme away, which is basically India is getting more narrowed, more constricted than it had any reason to be. And the result of this narrowing is, I believe, detrimental to the interest of India, and we can try to see how it relates to the past of India. The narrowing has two features, which I will describe as being unfortunate. One is it carries less ability to deliver ideas, concerns, and so on. And the other is the narrowing has the feature of limiting our interest in other concerns, particularly the concern about how the lives of people are going. And that includes on one side things like poverty, but it also on the other side includes the narrowing of our intellectual horizon. If I recognize that there are people here with different perspectives, but if I wanted to look at it rather quickly at the total picture, I would say that the dominant religious and cultural tradition, that of the Hindutva in India, I think has had a rather negative effect on Indian civilization, Indian culture as such. On one side, making it easier for poverty to linger and stay on the other side, making it harder to have the variety of cultural issues that we could easily address, but we often haven't. This is not to say that the Hindu tradition in India has not had, even earlier, a certain amount of limitedness. The word mlecha, meaning people from outside, used in a derogatory way. The focus on ethnic divisions connected with caste, color, and oh, that's a gigantic. Yeah, a bit more, yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So this distinction between black and white is actually, we shouldn't pretend otherwise. It goes way back, even in Upanishads, when you encounter a woman who is asked what her caste might be, and she said she has no idea because she was generated by a household in which there were often many guests, which is a rather courageous thing to say, and to which the Pandit who was listening to it says there's only a Brahmin could have answered that question with that clarity. Now, that places Brahmins in a position which Brahmins need not have any right to be at, but it also indicates a kind of division which already betrays an ethnic division which is not extraordinarily attractive. The interesting thing, however, is that along with that narrowness, which and it would be wrong to not see it in the Upanishads, or for that matter, in Gita, there were also attempts to broaden the cultural roots of India. You see it in a grand magisterial way in the writings, for example, an pronouncement of Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. And you see it from time to time in the writings of others, like Harshavardhan and so on. But you see it again very strongly in the 16th century, in the writings of 16th and 17th century, in the writings and influences of Emperor Akbar. Emperor Akbar could be seen as, in some ways, trying to do his best to make India go much broader, accepting people from different religious backgrounds as being fine Indians and not questionable. And there's some striking things. If you take a year like 1600, this is the time when the Akbar is trying to make use of the Hijra, Muslim Tariq or calendars, 1,000 years. But he's also trying to say how you have to accept people from very many different backgrounds, and you have to encourage them all. This is just at the time, 1600, when the religious persecution were quite strong in Europe. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stakes in Campo di Fiori in Rome, which is still a market there. When I spent 4 months in Rome, that's where I used to go every morning to do my shopping of fish and vegetables. But in 1600, people for apostasy were in fact burned, and a great scholar, Giordano Bruno, was one of them. The contrast between that and Akbar's trying to encourage people to have a different point of view was a major contrast. So you see, in my judgment, two quite different things. The narrowness on one side and an attempt to broaden things on the other. The broadening was also in terms of accepting refugees, which is rather an important problem today. Jewish immigrants started coming to India from shortly after the fall of Jerusalem. There were Christian refugees from the 3rd century AD. There were Muslim persecuted traders, not the kind of conquerors that we'll meet later to the north, to the Khyber Pass and so on, but through the bays in west, south India. And then, of course, Parsis started coming as soon as persecution began in Iran, and I think that continued until the present day. So there was a big tradition there. Now, if there is a thing to note there are two things particularly here to note. On one side, the great transformer of Indian politics, namely Mahatma Gandhi, and in a similarly proud way, Ambedkar, both of whom, in quite different ways, were trying to make India go much more broadly than it could have, taking a part of the tradition, but they were focusing on another part, which is where in Gandhi's case took particularly the form of being anti-untouchability. His famous quarrel or argument with Rabindranath Tagore came when Gandhiji, in order to fight untouchability, took the earthquake of 1934 as a sign of God's punishing Indians for untouchability. Tagore, of course, found this unbelievably unacceptable, because that was converting scientific epistemology into a branch of ethics. And he was upset, and he kept on arguing. And one of the few moments of glory I had in my life when I was about 13, I think, and when Gandhiji was visiting Shantiniketan. Rabindranath had died meanwhile. I had the opportunity of sitting opposite him and asking him a few questions. And one of the questions was the issue about the science of earthquakes and the ethics of untouchability. And I didn't get a chance to hear the answer because while Gandhiji was kind, one of his minders came over and told me I had to go away because this conversation must be continued at another time. Anyway, so there he was. Ambedkar rather more radically also went in that direction. I think what's happened, and this is where we ought to look at the present as things stand, is that since India's independence, the narrowing features of Hinduism became quite dominant. It's not only that Gandhiji was killed by an extremist Hindu, but also generally the focus moved sharply in the direction of cultivating Hindutva and basically trying to deny the Indianness of Muslims, which is a very significant move. Even up to 1937, in the elections, the victories went by and large to secular parties, including Congress. But things changed. The state from which I come, Bengal, it had the first victory of the Muslim League of Bengal was in 1946. And within 4 or 5 years of that, East Pakistan, which would become Bangladesh later, was not concerned so much with the Hindu-Muslim division, but with having the culture of Bengali literature and language in a prominent position. So it would be fair to say that there was a narrowing that's coming from both the Hindu as well as the Muslim sources. But the dominant feature was certainly Hindutva, if only because it was a much larger corpus of ideas, thoughts, and people. So, and as things, after independence, as things moved on, we find the Hindu element becoming more and more powerful, sometimes intolerably oppressive on others, with which the state where some Muslims could be persecuted for having beef in your refrigerator. Some Dalits, untouchables, could be killed on grounds that they had been not very nice to cows. How could, given the history and the background of India, this so easily happen? I think if it continues, it shows a certain element of I wouldn't say reversal only, but departure from the tradition of Ashoka, Akbar, Harsha, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and so on. That is the reality in which we live. Now, I think there are two things that's going on here. One is narrowness means that you cannot carry broader aspects of civilization and culture on your shoulders. It also means your interest in other problems tend to diminish. That is, every time the Hindutva focus becomes very strong, the focus on the poor, the focus on lack of basic health care, the lack of basic education, they tend to go down. Now, this is worth mentioning because it's often pointed out that China, too, has a great many poor people, as indeed they do. And yet, there does seem to be a difference. If you look at the poor in China, most of them do have schools, elementary hospitals to go to, basic health care of one kind or another. So there is a failure in India which is very striking, and I cannot restrain the thought that it's the focus on Hindutva, the religiosity, and in a very narrow sense, does some yield some neglecting, which is really quite striking in this. Now, historically, this has not been, in fact, so. I mentioned Akbar. Akbar, of course, had many interests, including law, to which I made a reference, and state politics, and individual rights. But there is also attempt at a cultural amalgamation. You see the attempt on the part of Akbar to have what was called by him Tariq Ilahi, which is the historical. He also had a combined religion thing, but this is history as well as calendar, and history in that form, in which he thought India should have one calendar which would include the Hindus and the Muslims and the Buddhists and the Christians and the Jews. Now, it's interesting that the Tariq Ilahi didn't actually survive in India at large, excepting from what is now Bangladesh and West Bengal. And there's if we look at the present day history of politics, the BJP, the Congress, the other secular parties that exist, there's a striking difference. What happened in the history is this, that Akbar was ascended to the throne in 1556 in Christian calendar. That in the Hindu calendar, namely Shaka, was 1478, whereas in the Hijra calendar, because of Muhammad being born much later, was 963. Now what Akbar did is to say, okay, that's the beginning of my calendar, so this becomes 0. Then he took the Hijra 963 as the date of the beginning of the new Tariq-Ilahi calendar. But he didn't make it run like the lunar Hijra, with generating 30 days in a month and moving fast forward. Instead, like solar and the Christian calendar, the Shaka calendar with the solar calendar, and he moved slowly. So today, if you look at, ask the question in what is the reflection of Tariq-Ilahi, surviving only in Bengal, the date is 1427. What is it? Well, it is 963 in the year zero when Akbar ascended the throne at 1556. So it's lunar up to that point, and then solar from that point. So Hijra has gone shot ahead with 30 days a month, whereas the Shaka slowly grinding a solar month and falling far behind. So by the time we are here, it's now 1427 in that mixture, 14 and then the Hijra has gone ahead, and of course the Christian calendar and the Shak calendar is ahead because of the origin being different. Now, is there any connection between that and the ability of Bangladesh to retain an element of combined civilizational feature? I think there is probably some. I was very struck when I went to Bangladesh and got an honorary degree at the university, and I asked them, would this be a religious ceremony? Being Bangladesh, that was a period when religion was quite important. And they said, no, it will be entirely secular. So I went to collect my degree, along with Hasina. She also got a degree then. But then there was first some reading from the Quran. Then there was some reading from the Gita. Then there was some reading from the Bible. And then there was some reading from the Buddhist Dhammapadam. There was a lot of religion to take. On the other hand, the attempt was to have them all, which is striking since 82% of the population is Muslim. And that is still formally the case. Later on, I had to go for a ceremony in the Bangla Museum. Again, these four reappeared. So I think this attempt that we see in the Hijra, which was Akbar's attempt, hasn't entirely died. And if there's some survival of a less narrow feature in Bangladesh, to what extent is it because it takes one part of the civilization history without taking the other part? Now, I think what I'm trying to say is that the real concerns that we have reason to pay attention to is the effect of the narrowing that we see from India's past into the present future. The BJP may not be the only party doing it, though it's certainly the most influential of the parties doing it. But it has its effect not only by making Muslims feel less genuine members of the Indian Republic. It also has, and that is really tremendously important, has the effect of neglecting other concerns, poverty, human rights, and so on. When I was young and in school, British school, the Brits had not yet left. All my uncles were in jail. Why were they in jail? Were they found guilty? No, except one who could have been, he certainly was prosecuted and went to prison, and he died in the neglect that British jails often produced. But most others were not like that. Most others were they were in prison not because they are found guilty, but because they may be doing harm to the Raj if they were free. I remember asking one of my uncle, in between his time in President's jail and Alipur jail, asked him, how long will this go on? And he said, well, until India is independent. Well, India has been independent for a while now. We're celebrating 75 years of that. And yet there are people in prison, not because they're found guilty of anything whatever. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, still very much a feature of independent India. How could that be? That's what India was fighting against. That's part of the narrowing that I think we see. And if a large number of politically active Indians don't see it, there has to be something wrong with that. If the Supreme Court notices that there is some aberration, and they will deal with it soon, very soon, without actually doing it, is there a lack of hurry in that, which shows a kind of failure on the part of an independent country like India. So, and similarly, if you look at health, I think one of the reasons why the health situation is so awful is because the basic health care has been so comprehensively neglected. Is there any connection between that and the focus on religion rather than health? I think there might be. there's a whole lot of subjects that require attention and should get attention. And in fact, the time undoubtedly has come for that to happen. I think I'll make two more points and I'll stop. One of the things that I found striking when I was young is that the issue is not so much that the Hindus and Muslims could tolerate each other, but they actually work together in a way that was prevented by the rise of Hindutva. That was true of architecture, that was true of music, that was true of painting, that was true of literature in a variety of ways. And people didn't often recognize how pervasive that was. There's a question I have asked often sometimes to my students when I was teaching in Delhi school, that what is the most famous building that was built by Muslims in honor of the mother of a Hindu advocate? Not easy to answer, but the answer is Taj Mahal, because it's built in the memory of Mumtaz Mahal, Shah Jahan's wife, whose son Dara Shikoh was the first translator of Upanishads from Sanskrit to Persian, a translation that would be used by Max Muller and others to translate into, in turn, English and German and French. There's a connection here, and because he had a role in the advocacy of Hindu scholarship, which came from a Muslim prince. And no one thinks of Taj Mahal. Often you will hear in UP that Hindus built Taj Mahal. That's really rubbish, of course. The people who built Taj Mahal were the local architects and enormously talented architects. I think it's that feature which we have lost and we have to regain. I'll end with one last account. Now that I'm 88, I can go back a long, long time. Now my grandfather's elder brother was called Apani Mohan Gupta, and I've had some basic acquaintance with him, and he liked recollecting a story that he was fond of. He said that, in the evening in our village, Sonarong, I used to go and have tobacco jointly with the Muslim Maulavi, who was a friend of mine, and we talked about many stories together. I'm trying to think of his name. But anyway, that was a regular visit he had. And he said that one day they were having tobacco when a Hindu priest was going fast. And this Muslim Maulvi said, come and join us. We're having great tobacco session. So the Muslim priest, whose name was Chakravarti, he said, I cannot possibly join you because I am a high caste Hindu and you are merely a Muslim priest. There's nothing in common between us for me to have tobacco. To which the Muslim Maulvi said, you know, you're making a mistake. I live and you live very similarly. You live by deceiving illiterate, ignorant Hindus. And I live by deceiving ignorant, illiterate Muslims. We are in exactly the same business. I'll stop there.
So thank you. Can you hear me? I'll go up. Oh, there you are. So thank you, Professor Sen. And as I said, of course, everything from a calendar that very few people know about, except from some scholars, that is still, in fact, active in parts of Eastern South Asia, to a joke, to quoting Akbar and Ashoka. But I think I should thank you, Professor Sen. Very enlightening. I should throw it open to some questions. Who would like to ask any questions? Tarun.
Professor Sen, thank you very much. I second Hitesh's gratitude, and also we're all in awe of your erudition in so many different ways. I guess one thing that was running through my mind is one way to read the history that you recounted is that there is an enormous inbuilt resilience.
Inbuilt?
Resilience
yeah.
in Indian society.
Yeah.
And of course we should be mindful of the stresses that are being caused by the current polarization and ethno-nationalism and whatever,
Yeah.
religious jingoism. But maybe there is some little silver lining intrinsic in South Asia, in the different South Asian countries, that brings it back to its central tendency. Is there any grounds for some sort of philosophical optimism or anything like that that you see, or am I just being...
No. Yeah. I think that's an excellent question, Tarun. And I'm delighted you asked it. I think there is and there isn't. This is because, as I tried to argue in the first part of my presentation, the Indian civilization has had both features. A feature of narrowing to which caste belong and untouchability belong, and going back a long time. We have to remember when Buddha was arguing against caste, 6th century BC, hell of a long time ago. And the country had lived with that for a very long time. On the other hand, Buddha himself was preaching something, and it's also clear that he took all of them. You know, Hitesh, referred to Sarvadasan Sangraha of 14th century by Madhavacharya. And he discusses in, I think, 18 chapters, different, by the way, Sarvadasan Sangraha means collection of all philosophies. The first chapter is about materialism. And it's a strikingly powerful materialism chapter. When I had cancer, first time I had cancer twice. A modest man, but the first time was when I was quite young, 18, and I got serious reason not to believe the stories I was being fed. In particular, in the first chapter, there is a materialist who says, listen, material phenomenon have material causes. Don't look for anything else as a source. It was very important when my doctor locally in the YMCA hospital was telling me that we don't know why you have that, but don't worry too much about that. God does many things for us which we don't know why he's doing it. And I told myself, gosh, that must be nonsense. And that was from chapter 1 from this book. Chapter 2 is on Buddhism. Quite clear that Buddha took the materialist very seriously, because he himself was an agnostic, and these are atheists. On the other hand, did he take the Hindu beliefs very seriously? Not that seriously in chapter 2. And it goes like that up to the 18th chapter. Now, I think there was in it an ability to accept a variety of points of view, which is an Indian history also, in Indian tradition too. And yet, and you are going in that direction. And the other is not like that at all, just, like the caste system, which upset Buddha so much. There also, in the Jataka stories, kind of stories about extraordinary touching story about a Buddhist follower walking through a very hot day and then very thirsty, runs into a woman raising water from a well. And he goes to her and says, can you give me some water to drink? And she says, I can certainly give you water, but I don't think you can drink that. You come from a upper caste part of society, and I come from the lowest caste. And that's the beginning of the story, when he discusses with her whether that could be right, and shows that it couldn't be right. So I think you have these features. So I think the question you're raising, Tarun, is very important, namely, why is it that some parts of the Indian civilization, including the narrowing part, has become so dominant today, neglecting other parts which are also parts of the Indian civilization, whether it came from Gandhi or Tagore. Tagore was asked in Oxford when he was giving Hibbert lecture, "What's your religion?" This was in at the beginning of his of the Hibbert lectures, and he said, "Well, I don't know the answer because part of it certainly is Hindu, part of it certainly is Muslim, and part of it undoubtedly is European. What does that make me?" That's the question that he gives as an answer. So I think the important thing is, in my judgment, that if Hindutva has tried to capture the territory of Indian past on grounds that it's their territory, that's a mistake, because the territory is much wider, and that territory has a claim on our attention in a way that we don't seem to be giving it. I mean, to put it very crudely, is the BJP's influence on making poverty less seriously understood, if basic health care often neglected. That is not an inescapable part of the tradition of the country, and neither of the Hindu part, and I didn't have time, but we can also talk about the Muslim part of it. We can talk about Kabir and Dadu and many others. So I think the way you put it, Tarun, that could we have some hope in that? Yes, we can. Should we rely on that? No, we have to work on that. We need to, it's not something that would happen automatically. We have to fight. Unfortunately, and here I am making a very political point. Some of the political parties which could have played that part don't seem to be playing it right now. That's a purely political point I'm making, and I'm making it self-consciously. I wish these political parties were a bit more political than they are.
Well said. We could take one more. Yakub, go ahead. This is going to be the last question, yeah.
Sure. I'm Yakub Bangesh. Well, thank you so much, Professor Sen, for that. It's great to, and amazing actually, to hear you in person and learn so much. Well, I had part of it was already answered by you, so I'll just ask the other bit of it. I was wondering that you've spoken very well about sort of how one can use traditions of the past to look at these strains of commonality and how they've actually, in the Bengal sense case, led to development. But it's also true that, the past is actually dividing also now. And, here I'm thinking of the recent Gyan Wapi mosque case in Benares, and how that's given, wind to hundreds of such cases around India, and, that whole thing is coming up.
Now, can you, for the sake of clarity,
Sure,
just say which aspect of it you are looking at particularly?
Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of pose the question that, is there anything in the present that you think that can be teased to develop the argument that you are making? Or would we have to kind of look at the past to get these examples and get these traditions out? Is there anything developing at the moment in India that you think is significant in this regard? Because, of course, with all this division, there are moments of unity. What's happening in the present that we can perhaps take to the future? So it's kind of moving past the disputes over the past and moving beyond that into looking towards the present and the future. What do you think are the elements today in India that can be picked up and taken forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no way we can fail to look at the present, because that's with us all the time. The past is interesting only because that requires a change of vision. In the way that the Brits often do. The French lately have been very interested. Where exactly the Russians are going, I don't know. But there is a whole lot of historical concern that has relevance. That's interesting. And more interesting, more unusual than the present. Because the present, obviously, there are people dying of. When I was 8, 3 million people died from famine. When I was 11, the riots consumed huge number of Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs. Now, these were inescapably present. So it's not so remarkable that the present is relevant. It is more remarkable that the past is. And that's why the reason why I bring it in. Now and there I was trying to do a bit of a twist to say past is, but there is more than one type of past that we have. And we have to, there's a matter of choice here. There's a matter of conflict here that we have to face. And that's important. I didn't bring in the word Nalanda. That is a Buddhist university established in 5th century and then destroyed and then revived. And for a while I was in charge of the revival until the central government told others that there will be no help coming until well, they didn't quite put it that way, but basically saying, unless I move away, there will be no help coming. But what did they teach? Among other things, they taught the fact which they, particularly the Chinese students in Nalanda, wrote a lot about, that the way to understand the proposition is to have an argument on different sides. In fact, Huan Sang, who was one of the first scholars and an important one to arrive after a 1-year journey from China to India, when they arrived, the moment they arrived, they said, you come in a very good time. There's a huge debate going on, which will begin in 2 hours' time. And do you want to do that? Now, this is a chap who had done a 1-year journey from China to India, and he said he wanted to rest a bit. And then they said, what's really so exciting, this debate? So eventually he went. Now, I think the role of the tradition that exists can be used in a more creative way, but it can also be used in a very destructive way, which I believe it is being used right now, right in India. across the country.